Chapter 91. You are to remain a virgin. Tell me, chica, why are you so insecure about yourself and scared every time I raise my hand? Hearing his question, Mia's expression closed up, and she looked away from him. She didn't like talking about her fears and insecurities, as she believed people would make fun of her and call her names. Though he had stolen her first kiss in the afternoon, she wasn't going to talk about such personal things with him, knowing he wasn't going to make her feel any better, but worse, just like Owen. Even though Owen was her childhood friend, he never failed to rub it in on her and remind her of how unattractive and abnormal she was. He would always tell her things like, "No matter how hard you try, Mia, nobody would ever fancy you for your looks. But I don't mind that you are plain. I will forever like you the way you are, even though you have abnormal nightmares and go crazy at the mere thought of rain." He was her best friend, yet he said those words, so of course she would believe him and think the worst of herself. Mia thought as she looked down to stare at Neil's torso with a blank look on her face. She was lost in thought when she felt his large hand cup her right cheek. She felt how warm his palm was against her cold face, and unconsciously, she leaned closer to his hand to feel his warmth. She didn't know what it was, but there was something about the man before her that always made her feel like she could trust him more than anyone. Even though he gave off a dangerous aura and signal, deep down in her heart, she felt safe around him. He was short-tempered, yet there were little things he did that always warmed her heart and mind. Just like now, he wasn't pushing her to speak, but was offering her comfort with the hand he used to cup her cheek. Mia slowly glanced up at his face and saw him looking at her with an unreadable expression she couldn't understand. He used his thumb to caress her cheek before opening his mouth to say, "Tell me, why do you flinch whenever I raise my hand? Did someone hit you in the past that left you traumatized?" he asked, while making a lazy circle around her waist to coax her into opening up to him. Though he appeared calm and a bit indifferent, deep down he was boiling at the idea of her being hit by someone else to the extent she was now traumatized. I don't know," she whispered in a voice that was barely audible, while unconsciously tugging at his shirt collar with her hand that was around his neck. She then continued to speak when she saw his frowned brows. "I have strange nightmares about being hit and shot by a man I can't see. He appeared like a shadow in my nightmares. His voice always sent terrified shivers down my spine. I don't know how to say this, but the feeling of his hit is always so real. Sometimes it almost feels like something that happened in my childhood, but it's impossible, because my mom never told me about being abused by anybody when I was a child." She muttered softly. A deep frown appeared on Neil's face as he listened to her words. Without looking away from her lowered face, he said, "Tell me everything you experience in your nightmare." "Huh?" Mia was taken aback by his words and quickly glanced at his face that was only an inch away from hers. She had never told anyone about this after the day she lied to her therapist that she no longer had the strange nightmares years ago. She always feared that she would appear as a weirdo when she told people about this. Even Owen had said it was just her mind making up things, but Mr. Ice Cube was ready to listen to her when he didn't seem like the kind to care about others. "Go on, tell me," he urged her calmly, while still gently caressing her waist, making her feel more comfortable on his lap and his presence. He wanted to know more about her and what happened to her memories and why she didn't remember her life in Mirage Mesa. He also wanted to know why he was unable to find her when he went looking for her that night after his parents' death. He knew he shouldn't allow himself to get too attached to her, because he would be going back to his own life after Monday, but he just couldn't help himself but want to know more. "Not all the images are clear," said Mia, who was now strangely feeling more comfortable in his presence to the point where she allowed her arms to wrap around his neck with her fingers unconsciously playing with the hair on the nape of his neck as she spoke. "The nightmare always starts with someone laying in a pool of blood with a man standing over the body. I don't have all of the details as everything is not clear, but the man." She paused as she felt a chill down her spine at the thought of how she felt every time she was plunged into that dream. She wouldn't have had the courage to continue if he didn't coax her with his large hand that was running up and down her spine. "I think he shot me or something after he hit me, because he pointed a gun at my head." With his ominous voice, he said, "Do you know what will happen to your head once I pull the trigger, little girl? Your tiny head will blow off and your brain will come oozing out of your skull." Those were his exact words, and those words would ring in my head like a broken record whenever I see things like rain and blood. Mia's eyes filled with tears as she lowered her head again with her hair falling all over her face. She didn't even realize she was slightly trembling until she felt a warm hand pull her hands, that were playing with his hair, into his own hand and gave them a gentle squeeze. "You are trembling," he whispered thickly. "You are still traumatized. Did you see a therapist?" he asked, softening his voice for the very first time to console someone. There was more to this nightmare that he needed to look into and make sure it wasn't something that had to do with something he suspected. Mia nodded her head. "Yeah, my mom took me to see a therapist when I was a teenager, but I didn't like the techniques she used to make me stop having those nightmares. She's more like a doctor than a therapist to me. She once gave me some injections that made me sleep for hours, and when I woke up, my head felt so heavy with a banging headache. So I lied to her that I don't have the nightmares anymore so I won't have to visit her place again." She explained softly. She could still remember how she used to feel nervous around the woman, whom her mother said was a therapist. She would always try to convince her that none of those things in her nightmares were true. Neil stayed quiet for a while as he thought through what he'd just discovered. He then looked at her tear-filled eyes. "How old were you when you said you moved to Whispering Way?" he asked, and when she told him, he realized it was 2 years after his parents died. However, he didn't say anything again and remained quiet. It seemed there were many missing puzzles in Mia Harrison's life that even she was unaware of, and he had no more time to dive into them to put the puzzle in place. His time with her was already coming to an end, and the moment he was done on Monday, he planned to wipe her off of his life completely. In that way, she would be safe from his uncle and his own enemies. She would never know who he was, nor would he have anything to do with her again. Thus, he would let his curiosity about her childhood life remain locked away. Neil thought as he raised his hand and wiped off the tears on her cheeks, making her look up to meet his eyes. His hand paused on her cheek as he was captivated with those large, innocent brown eyes of hers. His eyes slowly trailed down to the fullness of her inviting lips in front of him, and at that moment, every other rational reason for him not to kiss her again disappeared from his head. Mia, who was still trying to digest the fact that she felt more relieved after sharing her strange nightmares with someone who didn't tell her it was just her mind making up things, noticed his eyes lingering on her lips. Even in her state of heightened nervousness, she knew he intended to kiss her. He released her hand, which he had been holding earlier. Then he wrapped it around her and drew her purposefully closer to him as if she wasn't close enough. Her thighs brushed the inside of his hard thigh, where she could still feel the thing lightly poking her, sending shock waves of alarmed awareness through her entire nervous system. Mia would have loved to run away from him, but his hands slid up her arms to gently imprison her shoulders. In helpless anticipation, she watched his firm, sensual lips slowly descend to hers. His mouth covered hers, moving and probing in a kiss that was lazily coaxing, yet breathtakingly insistent. Mia tried to desperately hold on to her fleeing sanity when his wet, warm mouth covered hers, but the moment his wet tongue slid against her lips, she lost the battle. A moan escaped her lips, and she leaned into him and let him part her lips. His response was instantaneous. His arms tightened around her, imprisoning her against his chest, while his mouth opened hungrily, his tongue plunging into her mouth and stroking against hers. Raw heat exploded inside Mia. Her body unconsciously arched against him, and her thighs pressed against the hard thing that was poking between her own thighs, and her hands lifted compulsively to caress his neck and slide through the soft hair at his nape as she eagerly responded to his hungry mouth. She didn't know what she was doing, but his demanding kiss made everything that was happening at this moment seem right. They had no relationship, but she didn't care. She liked him and liked the way he made her feel. Mia admitted to herself as she moaned against his kiss. The sound made him deepen the kiss. By the time he finally dragged his mouth away from hers, Mia felt branded by that kiss, permanently marked as his possession. Trembling with her inner turmoil, she leaned her forehead against his shoulder. His warm lips drifted across her cheek to her temple, trailing downward until his teeth playfully nipped her earlobe. He spoke huskily against her ear. "Eres una chica hermosa, pero no puedes verlo," he whispered thickly. "You are a beautiful girl, but you can't see it." Mia leaned back in his arms and looked up at him. The smoky gray eyes gazing back at her were heavy-lidded and smoldering with intense desire, and although he wasn't smiling, the side of his mouth was twitched upward. She blushed hotly and then asked in a soft murmur, "What do you mean?" "I don't understand Spanish." One of his strong hands slid up and down her spine in a lazy caress. Then the other one went up to caress her slightly swollen lips. He didn't answer her question and instead said, don't ever let any other man kiss you the way I did. Even if I'm not there, I'll know if you let anyone touch or kiss you. Remember my words, Harrison, I'll kill whoever you let touch you in my absence. You must remain a virgin. Chapter 92 Bloodbath. The black motorcycle drove away after dropping her outside the apartment building where she lived, but Mia didn't make any attempt to walk inside the building. This was despite the fact that the person who'd dropped her off had left without replying to the question she asked him after he dropped her off. She had asked him, "Will you come to the university on Sunday? I mean, we will be having a rehearsal for the school contest." Though the contest was on Monday, the students who were participating in the competition were to come to the university on Sunday for practice, which Mia had been informed of by Rain when she was in Mr. Bennett's condo. However, she wasn't sure if the professors would be attending on Sunday. But he didn't reply. He only took off the helmet he had worn for her when she was about to climb his brand new motorcycle in the parking lot, and wore it back on his own head. Before kicking his motorcycle, he turned to her and, with an indifferent voice, he said, "Go inside and sleep early. Have a good night's sleep, Harrison." He patted her head and rode away with lightning speed, without answering the question she'd asked, leaving her standing in bewilderment. Mia hadn't even asked him to drop her at home, as she had been lost after the heated kiss they shared in his condo. She had sat dazed on his lap after he whispered those words to her. "Don't ever let any other man kiss you the way I did. Even if I'm not there, I'll know if you let anyone touch or kiss you. Remember my words, Harrison, I'll kill whoever you let touch you in my absence. You must remain a virgin." He had told her in a low, dangerous voice that made her heart race and her toes curl in excitement. She should have been alarmed by his words, but her body gave the opposite reaction. He had said those words in an intimate way that made it appear like they had something going on between them. Mia thought as she stood rooted in place. She had no plan of losing her virginity or allowing any man, who wasn't the one she would end up with, to touch her, as that wasn't her priority now. Her priority was to study and graduate from the university and get a job. Nonetheless, she had been curious why he had said those words and asked him why, but he didn't reply. He only lifted her off his lap and ran his fingers through her hair while saying, "Go get your bag. I will drop you off at home." And now that he'd dropped her at home in the middle of the night, he left without answering yet another question she asked him. She felt somehow dejected and confused by his actions. One moment he acted like he cared, and the next, he acted indifferent. He was unpredictable. Mia dragged her feet into the apartment building, glancing in the direction he had left, perhaps hoping to see him return and answer her question before Monday, as she desired to see him again. She didn't want to develop any feelings for the man, but her heart was going against her and warming up to him. He wasn't the type of man she had envisioned liking, and though she may have insecurities hindering thoughts of dating or loving someone, she still harbored a desire to fall in love someday. The man she had imagined liking was nothing like her aloof professor, save for his gray eyes. But now, her heart was going against her. Mia thought as she raised her hand to trace her lips that still held the lingering warmth of his kiss. Even her face still felt warm, and she didn't have to look into a mirror to know that she was blushing. Her heart suddenly started to race at the thought of his kiss, and butterflies fluttered in her stomach. Covering her heated face with her hands while ascending the stairs, Mia didn't see Julie coming until she collided with her on the staircase, nearly stumbling backward before steadying herself. "Watch where you're going," Julie exclaimed in annoyance upon realizing it was Mia she had bumped into. Eyeing Mia's plain shirt and jeans, she asked, "Where are you coming from at this time of the night, Mia? Don't tell me the whispers about you in town are true?" She raised her thin brows and crossed her arms against her ample chest. Julie had previously asked Mia to introduce her to her wealthy connections at university, but Mia had been avoiding her since the night she had come to borrow alcohol. Now, here she was, returning home late while everyone else had retired to bed. Mia, who had regained her balance on the staircase, looked up at Julie's words. "What whispers?" she asked, ignoring the girl's first question, as she had no reason to explain to her where she was coming from, knowing the nosy girl was also sneaking out of the building. "Don't act like you don't know. Everyone's talking about your slutty character that broke Owen's heart and made him leave Whispering Way. You act like a Miss Goody Two-Shoes, but in reality, you are even more of a slut than I am. You broke his heart so badly he couldn't stay anymore, you should." Julie's words blurred away in Mia's head as she heard that Owen had left Whispering Way. However, she didn't let it bother her that much, as she knew she hadn't done anything wrong to break his heart. Besides, he would find his way back after he was done sulking wherever he went. He was the one who insulted her, and she wouldn't feel bad for anything that wasn't her fault. Mia thought as she sidestepped the girl on the staircase and continued on her way while ignoring Julie's glares and insults. They could talk about her for all she cared. Since Mia had already assured her mother that she wouldn't be coming home early today, the woman hadn't waited for her and was already fast asleep when she entered the house. Mia locked the front door and walked into her own room and collapsed on the bed. She stared blankly at the ceiling in her room. As she lay motionless, Mr. Ice Cube's expensive cologne that still lingered on her body swirled to her nose, making her blush. She turned to her side and hugged her pillow to her chest with a dreamy smile on her face. She didn't know whether by kissing her, he meant he liked her too, but she liked him. She admitted it to herself, and the thought of him liking her back made her smile widen. In all of her life, she had never spoken of her nightmares to anyone but her mother and therapist, including Owen, who never took it seriously. But now she had told a man she didn't even know anything about, and he believed her. Though she liked him, she was also curious about who he really was. He had no family photographs in his office or at home, which meant he wasn't married, but she always had a weird gut feeling whenever she was around him. It was like he was hiding something, like he wasn't who he claimed to be. Perhaps she was overthinking it, but when he said he could strangle her to death and dispose of her body with no one finding out, she had almost believed he could do such a thing with the tone of his voice that made her immediately wary of him. Mia's mind swirled with countless thoughts as she lay on her bed until she ended up falling into a deep sleep that came with a strange dream. She found herself standing on the performance stage that was built for the competition in Ivy Grove, with dozens of flashing cameras blinding her eyes. Though somewhere in her mind she knew it was a dream, it felt real to her as she tried to look beyond the flashing lights. She couldn't see below the stage, but she heard the crowd make fun of her while they threw things at her and called her names. "Tell that plain bitch to get off the stage. We don't want her for our school queen. What's that ugly scar on her thigh? Ew! Get the disgusting bitch off the stage." As all the words and things were thrown at her, Mia hugged her midriff and realized she was wearing a dress that looked like a rag. Ashamed, she began to back away from the stage only to bump into someone's solid chest. Turning around, she was met with angry, intense silver eyes that glared murderously at the crowd that was throwing things at her. Immediately, she felt safe as he wrapped an arm around her body and pulled her to him. But the look in his eyes was so scary, she couldn't help but shiver from the cold chill that ran down her spine. Before Mia could react or speak, he had pulled out a gun from behind his trousers and began to shoot down at the crowds. Terrified screams filled the entire grounds as people started to fall dead. Her eyes widened in horror as the entire place suddenly went silent with blood filling the whole stage. She looked up at him only to see him grinning down at her with a crooked expression. "I told you I will kill whoever dares to touch you. Now come with me, little kitten." He opened his arms, indicating for her to come and hug him, but Mia repeatedly shook her head and began to back away from him. When he saw that she was backing away from him, the smile on his face slowly started to vanish. "Come here, Harrison," he ordered her with his authoritative tone, but this time, there was a murderous look in his eyes. Seeing that she was about to run away, he lifted his gun and spoke in a voice that sounded nothing like him, with his face changing into someone else. "Do you know what will happen to your head once I pull the trigger, little girl? Your tiny head will blow off and your brain will come oozing out of your skull." Before she could run away, he pulled the trigger. Chapter 93. She liked him. On Sunday morning, Mia arrived at school to find out that everywhere was decorated for the event tomorrow. She and Rain looked around the performance hall to see how the stage had been set and decorated to perfection. Looking at the stage, Mia suddenly remembered the strange dream she had the other day, and a shiver was quick to run down her spine, making her look away from the stage. She wasn't the kind to get nervous about standing before a crowd, but that dream had made her feel even less enthusiastic about the event tomorrow. When she'd woken up from the dream, she had been slightly trembling and had quickly grabbed her phone and texted Mr. Ice Cube. But he hadn't replied to her text for the whole of Saturday, and today was Sunday, where she also realized none of the professors of their major had come to the university. Mia had been feeling dejected when she didn't see his reply to her simple text message. "I had a strange dream about you last night, and I woke up feeling like I ran a marathon. Did you sleep well last night?" She had texted him, even though she doubted he would reply to her, as he didn't seem like the kind to have small talks. But then she had hoped he would at least reply after what happened between them on Friday night. Though they had just kissed and nothing more, she had felt weirdly marked as his possession when he whispered those words about her not letting any other man touch or kiss her in his absence. But now that he hadn't bothered to reply to her, when she had seen that the message was delivered to him, she felt dejected and discarded. "Are you all right?" Rain asked. "You have been spacing out the whole time in the practice room when Carlos was trying to take your pictures." Mia, who heard her friend's words, forced a smile and nodded. "I'm fine. It's just that I don't feel as excited as everyone about the contest. I don't see the point in everything. Why the hell are we to catwalk on stage like we are walking down a beauty pageant runway? Yes, I get the fact that they are looking for the most beautiful and intelligent, but I just don't think all that is necessary." She voiced out her other frustration, since she couldn't tell Rain about what had happened between her and her Ice Cube professor. "My legs hurt from having to practice the walk on that runway." Mia wouldn't have even bothered to come if she knew she would be tortured by wearing tall heels to practice her walk. She hated heels but had been forced to wear them by that nosy Carlos, who was hell-bent on making her win the competition to earn himself the reward of being the best photographer on campus. Rain chuckled softly upon hearing her friend complain about something every student was happy about. "You know you have to relax, Mia. I know you never wanted to join this competition, but trust me, I know there is something else bothering you other than everything you complained about. It's either you spill the beans, or I fish the words out of you," said Rain as she wrapped her arm around Mia's neck. "Now tell me everything. You have been looking down at your phone like you are waiting for something. Have you finally decided to fall in love with someone without telling me?" she asked while wiggling her eyebrows. Mia's cheeks flushed deep red at Rain's words. "Aha! Look, you are blushing. Now tell me everything," Rain exclaimed, excited to hear what her friend was not telling her. Though she had only known Mia for 2 years, she could tell when she was trying to hide something from her. "He kissed you," Rain exclaimed after Mia finished telling her everything that happened between her and the university Adonis yesterday. "Hey, keep your voice down." Mia glared at her astonished friend, who had stopped walking and was now looking at her with her mouth left ajar in surprised disbelief. "You mean he kissed you in reality, not in your dreams?" Rain asked to confirm, as she was well aware of how their Adonis professor never showed any interest in any of the students, not even the female professors who tried to get on his good side. He was the kind to pass by the most beautiful girls on campus without giving them a glance. He never even smiled when teaching, nor did he give the students face to approach him and ask any questions. He was like a beautiful poisonous fruit. You can admire it, but you can't take a bite, as you would die if you dare. However, now Mia was telling her he kissed her. She would surely be surprised. "I thought you said he isn't your type of man when I teased you about having a crush on him? What happened to the gentleman who will give me his coat when it's cold, and give me flowers as a gift, your dream man?" Rain laughed as she linked her arms together with Mia and resumed to walk towards the cafeteria. "I still want a man like that. It's not like I am dating Leo or something. He's not my type," Mia muttered, but deep down she knew she was only deceiving herself. Who was she kidding? She liked the man to the point where she was now getting affected that he wasn't replying to her text message. She even came to school on Sunday just so she could take a glance of him and feel assured that he was close by. She didn't want to fall for him, but she couldn't stop her heart from reacting every time his name or anything about him was mentioned. Few hours later, Mia was still sitting in the cafeteria with Rain and Carlos, who had suddenly decided to join them when he walked in and found them talking with each other. The cafeteria was so packed with students that one could barely hear what the other person was saying unless you raised your voice. Everyone was sitting in groups. On one side, the performance arts students were sitting with a few of them standing to rehearse their performance for tomorrow, while some of the students, who had no part in the event, laughed at the free show displayed for them. On the other far side, where the popular students were seated, Diane was seen with her 2 friends and Alaric, who was also one of the male participants of the event, and his dudes who were eating and laughing at something one of them said. Alaric hadn't come to school again ever since he was beaten up by the professor, but he came today for the rehearsal as he was determined to win the crown of the university king. "I can't believe she's still one of the participants after the scandal about the town she lives in that blew up on the school forum," remarked one of Diane's friends to Alaric, who was glaring at Mia from where he sat with his fingers tapping on the table while he chewed on his food. "She's not my fucking business as long as she is not competing with me." It's you girls who should be worried about having to stand on the same stage as a plain Jane of the university, said Alaric, who shrugged casually. Though he would do anything to get back at the girl for letting that fucking professor break his arm, which hadn't healed up till now, in the name of acting cool, he had gotten rid of the bandages. Yeah, right. It has everything to do with you, scoffed Diane to her ex-boyfriend. If you win the crown of the year, and let's say for example, she wins the queen, which I know is impossible with that plain look of hers, you will be forced to do activities with her in the school. You will be seen often being with her. Now tell me, how is that not your business? She smirked, seeing how her words had hit their mark on Alaric, who was quick to frown and curse under his breath. You are fucking right. I will be dead before I will be forced to hold hands with that bitch. She must not win. He slammed his hands on the table while glaring at Mia, who was smiling about something that nosy sissy, Carlos, said to her. What do you suggest we do to get her off the competition? He asked Diane as he looked away from the brown-haired girl to his beautiful ex-girlfriend. Diane smiled in satisfaction as she had succeeded in getting Alaric right where she wanted. It's simple. We have to force her into dropping out of the competition, and I have the right thing to make her not show up tomorrow. Back at Mia's table, Carlos asked while pushing up his glasses, have you put your event dress in the changing room? You know you have to come early tomorrow as the school has arranged for the makeup artists. All you need is to bring your dress and shoes, which should be in the changing room right now. You have asked me that question more than twice, Carlos. Yes, I have put the dress away in the changing room, remarked Mia as she played with the straw in her cold drink. Since she hadn't accepted Neil's designer dresses, which she was grateful he hadn't realized she had rejected them yet, she had brought one of her holiday dresses which was decent enough for an evening gown, but not fashionable enough for tomorrow's event. Which of the dresses did you pick? You didn't show it to me, pouted Rain, who had been looking forward to knowing which dress her friend would wear. Mia smiled awkwardly. Don't worry, you will see it tomorrow. I have put it away in the changing room wardrobe along with my shoes. I can't go and open the place again. I hope you picked a beautiful dress. I've had sleepless nights due to trying to make you part of the participants who make it up to the stage tomorrow. Don't disappoint me, Mia. My future career as a photojournalist depends on this, said Carlos as he took Mia's hands into his while putting on a pitiful expression. We have to win this. Hey, quit your show, Carlos. Mia will win, and I say this because I know how intelligent my bestie is. Besides, I can guarantee you that her dress suits her so well, I'm sure you won't recognize her tomorrow. Gosh, I can't wait to see all those idiots who call you plain Jane swallow their tongues and die from disbelief. Rain cupped her face in excitement. Mia, on the other hand, felt a surge of guilt overwhelm her for not trying her best to win this competition. Carlos had been working for months to get her into this, while Rain had been dying to show all the bullies that Mia could win the crown despite them looking down on her. However, here she was on the path of disappointing them by not accepting those designer dresses on Friday. As Mia was silently regretting her actions of not accepting the dresses, a male student in the cafeteria walked up to them with a tray containing non-alcoholic expensive glasses of wine. The student put the tray down on their table, earning 3 confused looks from the people sitting on the table. We didn't ask for this. Why did you bring this? Asked Carlos to the freshman student. Oh, my apologies then. I thought one of you asked for this. I guess I've got the wrong table, said the student with a friendly smile as he took back the tray. However, as he was about to turn and leave, something tripped his leg, and he ended up falling towards Mia with the entire wine pouring over her head all the way down to her face. Mia, who had been lost in her own thought, quickly stood up with wine dripping from her face, with a few drops entering her mouth as she gasped in shock. All heads turned towards her in the cafeteria. However, Carlos stood up and started to scold the student while also threatening to report him, despite the fact that he was apologizing to Mia and saying it was a mistake. Thinking it was indeed a mistake, Mia said, "It's fine. It's just wine, not poison. Let it slide, Carlos." Chapter 94 The Note in the Kitchen. As the sun began to dip behind the horizon, Mia arrived home with her clothes stained with a vivid purple color because of the wine that had been poured on her. Her hair looked damp, as she had gone to wash it in the restroom after she left the cafeteria with Rain. As she walked into their apartment complex building, she felt her nose slightly tingle, and before she knew it, achoo! She sneezed, her head jerking forward. Mia walked into their apartment room feeling slightly cold and feverish, but she ignored the feeling, thinking it was due to her exhaustion from having to practice the stage walk countless times in the rehearsal room. Dropping her bag and phone, she took off her clothes and picked up her towel. Mia took a hot, soothing, long shower before she dried herself and wore her casual home attire. By the time she was done with everything, she was already feeling slightly weak. She had intended to go to her mother's eatery but decided against it when she felt like lying down. As she pulled her blanket and lay in bed, her phone beeped on her nightstand. Stretching out her arm with her eyes closed, she took the phone and tapped the screen. Mia's tired expression immediately brightened up as she saw the person who messaged her. It was her Ice Cube professor, who she had been looking forward to receiving his reply. "What did you dream about?" he asked. And Mia didn't even hesitate to type her reply to his question. She told him about her weird dream, but she hesitated to tap send, as she was nervous that he might not reply to her again and leave her hanging. She had only sent that message about her dream because she wanted to strike up a conversation by asking if he slept well, but he had only replied to ask her about her dream. She didn't know why she was suddenly acting like a teenage high school girl who was anxious to speak to her crush, but the thought of boring him out with her silly dream made her stare at the message for a while before finally tapping send and cringing when she noticed the delivered mark on her screen. Mia found herself anxiously staring at her screen, waiting for his reply. Would he find her boring and stupid? Would he think of her as weird and desperate for his attention? As she stared at the screen feeling anxious, she felt her head throb with a painful headache that felt like her skull was about to split into two. She closed her eyes and used one of her hands to massage her head while grimacing in pain. What was with this headache and sudden weakness? Mia thought to herself, as she hadn't felt this feverish in a long time. She pulled the blanket up and used it to cover up to her chin while holding her phone against her chest. When Mia thought he wouldn't reply because he probably thought of her as weird, she decided to sleep, but her phone beeped, making her quickly bring it up to her face to read his reply. "You surely have so much going on in that head of yours to have such a dream. Were you thinking about that unknown man from your nightmare for you to see me in him?" Mia smiled as she typed her reply. "Something like that. You were so scary with a gun in hand, but I assured myself that it's impossible for you to know how to operate a gun when you are a professor. What did you do today?" Perhaps it was because of the kiss they shared and how she had told him about her nightmares that made her feel so much at ease with him now. She felt the feverish feeling in her body momentarily go away as she saw him reply a few seconds after her sending the message. "Who told you professors don't know how to operate guns? You can never know who has a gun and when they will shoot at you, so be mindful and not trust anybody enough to stay unguarded." "I don't tell people about what I do, little kitten." Mia pursed her lips as she read his reply. Why was it that this Ice Cube never replied to her questions directly? "But I trust you will never shoot me even if you have a gun, would you?" she asked. "You never know," he replied, making Mia frown upon reading his curt reply. Does this mean he could shoot her if he had a gun, or was he trying to scare her away from him? "Why do I feel like you don't like responding to questions? You figured that out, Harrison, so why do you keep asking the questions?" "Because I want to know more about you," she replied. And just like that, she and her Ice Cube professor kept on sending each other messages back and forth, with him not answering any of her questions. Her curiosity to know more about him kicked in once again. "What did you do before you were assigned as a substitute professor at Ivy Grove?" It was a question she had been curious to know ever since the day she had known him. Mia knew he couldn't be a professor nor someone who graduated from journalism, because from what she had noticed of him, he seemed to hate journalists. However, what she didn't understand was how he ended up teaching in their major. Her instinct told her he wasn't who he appeared to be, and there was so much about him he wasn't letting out. And as always, he didn't reply to that question and left her hanging for a few minutes before he sent another message. "I would have to kill you after I tell you that. If you are willing to say goodbye to the world, Chica, then it will be my pleasure to tell you. Now, go to sleep and don't let that silly mind of yours wander to unwanted places. You have a big day tomorrow. Good night." Mia stared at the message feeling disappointed that he didn't answer her question yet again. However, she didn't take his threat about killing her seriously. He must be joking. Remembering she indeed had a big day tomorrow, she put her phone away after wishing him good night as well and turned to her side. Ignoring the discomfort in her body and head, she closed her tired eyes. Far away from Whispering Way, in Neil's condo where he stood staring at the night city view from his glass wall with his phone in hand. He hadn't even meant to reply to the girl's message in the first place and had ignored it for the whole day. But this evening, after he came back from Ivy Grove, where he had disguised as one of the workers with his men to plant cameras in all of the corners of the performance stage, he had seen the girl walking out of the gate with her hair dripping wet. He had acted like he hadn't seen her because of the soldiers and his uncle's men that were with him, but he had frowned upon seeing her stained clothes and dripping hair. That night when Neil had dropped her off at home, he had decided it would be the last time he would ever be in contact with her, but when he returned to his condo, he hadn't been able to sleep because of all the thoughts of her that swirled around his mind, and the thought of how she had made him feel excited by just the kiss they shared in his living room. She was innocent, and her innocence only made the urge to possess and protect her strong in him. He had thought he would be able to get rid of her from his mind completely, but the task seemed impossible. He wanted to keep her and mark her as his woman, where no other man would dare to touch her but him. He wanted to be the one to taint that innocence of hers, but he couldn't because he would be risking not just his mission, but her life. Neil looked down at her message where she wished him good night. It seemed Mia's curiosity would never die until she knew what he did before he was assigned as a substitute professor in Ivy Grove. She was a daring, curious kitten who always tested his patience, and if only she knew how he could kill people who annoyed him or dared to test his patience, she would let her curiosity about him die, and she would obey his words and stay away from him. But her daring ways amazed him more than it annoyed him. She had even gone as far as to glue small notes in his kitchen. Neil had gone to get water in the refrigerator this morning when he saw a note that read, "Remember to keep and wash whatever you use in this kitchen rather than to dispose of it. What you waste are things some people are working their sweats out to get." He had read the note and knew immediately who would dare to stick it there. It was the kitten he allowed into his house. She had even glued another on his bin that said, "Don't dispose them, wash them." He didn't know why he didn't dispose of her silly notes and left them there instead. And because of them, he had found himself washing the disposable water bottle he was about to throw into the bin. He had felt stupid when he realized he was washing something that was supposed to be thrown away. He had felt annoyed for following her instructions like a fool. He had never in his life used his hands to wash anything he used, but today he had been washing a disposable water bottle because some girl had instructed him to do so. And now that he thought about how he didn't end up throwing away the water bottle, the corner of his mouth pulled up into a crooked smile as he shook his head. "I must be going out of my fucking mind," he muttered to himself as he ran his fingers into his thick, dark hair. Chapter 95 The School Event, Part 1. It was finally the anticipated day at Ivy Grove Institute, with countless fancy cars driving onto the school grounds. The university premises were filled with students who were dressed to perfection, as if they had dressed to kill. Among the students, there were people in disguise from two sides, Doc Roll men and the soldiers. The students still lingered outside the performance hall, as the people performing were still in the changing room. The annual event wasn't just about who won the crown. There were other performances that would take place from students from different majors. The entire school grounds were filled with not just students and their families, who came to watch the show, but also paparazzi and media people who carried their cameras about to capture all the events that would take place today. Ivy Grove Institute was one of the top universities in the country, thus, no one wanted to miss the anticipated annual event. There were also a lot of representatives from the entertainment industry, because the event served as a platform to discover emerging talents and scout for potential collaborations. Cameras kept flashing in every corner, with students trying their best to show up in front of the cameras, as it was a live event. Nobody wanted to be left out of such an opportunity. As everyone was moving around or standing in front of the cameras for interviews, Neil was standing with his men, who dressed up as students, with some of them having to use makeup to change their faces. They had split into 4 groups, with Jason leading one of the groups. Neil spoke into the covert earpiece in his ears. "Keep tabs on the surveillance footages in the vans. If you see anything unusual, report immediately. Do you copy?" "Yes, sir," came the unified reply from the soldiers, who were scattered in different directions in their secret vans where there were surveillance footages of the entire university grounds. The dock roll had chosen today for their operation, as no one would suspect the unusual boxes being carried out of the school. They were being careful and calculative so as not to bring any unwanted attention to their illegal activities, so they were using the event as camouflage to take things out. If Neil succeeded in uncovering the mastermind behind these illegal activities, his search for his family's killer would come to an end, and he would finally be able to accomplish his one and only goal. Furthermore, he wanted to prove his suspicion about Kelvin Rodrigo, the same man who had done nothing but put his eyes on the Galvera properties after his parents' death. Neil had suspected the man for years, as they once lived in the same town in Mirage Mesa, but he had no evidence to prove he was among the Da Kroll, or to prove that he was the one who pulled the trigger and shot his parents on that unfaithful night. "What's that you're holding, Neil?" Liam, who had used makeup to alter his appearance, asked as he looked down at the luxury shopping bags in Neil's hand. He had meant to ask when he saw Neil taking the bag from a delivery guy at the gate of the university, but he had been distracted by Jason, who was saying his usual shit about how this mission must not be ruined by anyone, with his eyes glaring at Neil as he spoke. However, now that he noticed, the shopping bags had a luxury logo of the most expensive clothing brand in the country. What was he doing with them when they were on a mission? Liam thought as he waited for his friend's reply that never came, even after minutes, as he was busy looking around as if he was searching for someone in the crowd. "Who are you searching for?" Liam asked again when he noticed a deep frown settled on Neil's forehead as he looked towards a certain direction. He followed his line of sight and saw that he was looking at a young woman with red hair who stood with a tall, lean guy with glasses, who was clutching a camera to his chest. From their body language, they seemed to be worried about something as they tried to call someone. Why was Neil looking at them like he was trying to know what was making them worry? Who were they? Liam thought as he stared at the two. But upon looking closely, the red-haired young woman looked familiar, as if he had seen her before. Liam narrowed his eyes as he tried to remember where he knew her from, then suddenly his eyes widened slightly as recognition flicked into his dark eyes. She was Jason's sister, the girl who knew nothing but to keep sending him silly gifts at the camp. He hadn't recognized her a moment ago because in the past she used to be so skinny, and she also wore braces with large pimples on her face. She was that kind of annoying teenage girl who would repeatedly send him her silly poetic letters, as if he cared about the crush she had on him. But now she looked completely different from the girl he used to remember. She wore a beautiful orange dress that hugged her body in the right way. Her red hair was tied into a bun with a few strands framing her long face. Who would have thought she would bloom into a beautiful flower? No wonder that bastard Jason is trying to hide her away from me. How interesting. By the way, why are you staring at her? Do you also find her attractive? Liam asked as he turned back towards Neil only to find the spot where he had been standing to be empty. Where the hell did he disappear to? He murmured in disbelief as he looked around the place only to see Neil's imposing back disappearing among the crowd of students going inside the performance hall. Where is he going? Liam put his hands on his hips as he sighed in disbelief. What was his friend up to now? There were cameras planted in every angle, and General David and other higher-ranked soldiers could see and hear their every move. Though Neil didn't know about it, his uncle had called Liam in this morning and told him to keep an eye on his friend and make sure he doesn't do anything out of their plan. Their movements had been calculated, and going into the performance stage wasn't part of it because the Da Kroll operations would be taking place outside when the performance would be going on. However, it seemed Neil was moving out of plan again. As Liam was trying to wonder what his friend was up to, the latter made his way through the performance hall. He had read Rain and Carlos' lips to know that they were trying to look for Mia. From what he heard, she hadn't shown up in school, and her phone was going straight to voicemail. All of the participants of the events were already present and were getting ready, but Mia hadn't even showed up. Neil knew he should mind his damn business, but he couldn't do that. Whenever it had something to do with that little kitten, he couldn't ignore her, even though he wanted to. And instead of him sticking to his own business outside, he was here trying to look for her in the crowd. He had called her, and just like her friends, it wasn't reachable. Damn it. Neil cursed as he ran his fingers through his hair in frustration, as her phone still wasn't going through. Could it be that she had changed her mind from attending the event? In another part of the university, where it was deserted with no students in the area, a few men dressed in black suits stood around some packed boxes. All the packages are ready, boss. When shall we move? Questioned one of the men into the earpiece in his ears. You can't move now. The coast is not yet clear. The boss said we have to watch out for that Wayner guy. We don't know if he is among the crowd. Came Simon, the man with the scar, voiced in the earpiece. Mr. Rodrigo and the others can see all your movements. You have to stay there until you are permitted to move. We can't risk that bastard ruining this for us. And remember the orders. You have to keep an eye on that nosy girl. If she makes any move, get rid of her. Sir, what does Wayner look like so we can watch out for him in the crowd? Asked one of the men who was new to the gang. He had heard the rest of the members talking about Neil Wayner, who goes around ruining their shipments for the past few years. However, this Neil had not interfered with their shipment for the past 2 years until that day he defused a bomb planted by the Da Kroll in the neighboring country. And now he was back to getting into their business ever since that girl had given out their information. Nobody knows what he looks like, which is why you have to be careful. He could be anybody. Back in the performance hall, Neil had searched almost all the places, but Mia was nowhere in sight. It was like she didn't come to school, as Rain had said. He had looked for almost half an hour, and the more he tried to call her and the call wasn't going, the more angry and worried he got. He was worried because he feared that his uncle had done something to the girl so their mission could move smoothly. It had been years since he had worried for someone's safety, and the more he felt that emotion of concern, the more a raw, savage rage swelled inside his blood. His fists automatically clenched tightly, and he slammed it against the door in front of him, leaving a deep dent on the wooden door that banged open at the force of his hit, making a few heads turn in his direction. But Neil didn't give a damn whenever he was angered. There was a faint blood mark on the dent he made on the door, which meant he had injured his knuckles from the hit, but Neil ignored the pain and walked out of the hall. He should be out there keeping a close eye on his men, but here he was searching for some girl because she was making him worried. There was only one way to find out if she had fallen into his uncle's hands. He had to go and check her house. As Neil decided to drive quickly to Whispering Way and make certain she was all right, one of the students he had asked if they had seen Mia Harrison a while ago, approached him. With her cheeks flushed, she shyly called out, "Mr. Bennett." But Neil intended to ignore her as he had an urgent matter to handle. But he stopped when he heard her next word. "Aren't you looking for Plain Jane?" The girl's words trailed off when he shot her a deadly glare for how she addressed Mia. She swallowed hard and quickly amended her words as if realizing her mistake. I mean Mia. I think I saw her just now in the changing room," said the female student, who had personally gone to search for their school's Plain Jane after their university Adonis asked for her. She had wanted an opportunity to be noticed by the professor, and she had used this as an excuse and searched for Mia so he would give her attention. However, the moment he heard her words, he didn't even thank her and brushed past her in long, purposeful strides.